Hello everyone. Today we will be discussing how a touchscreen works. Usually on the Partition Project we go over simple topics and talk about them briefly, but this video will be a bit longer and a little more advanced, so bear with me here. This is my first video. So first let's overview what a touchscreen is. Now you've probably used one without even knowing actually, since a lot of phones and a lot of tablets have them. If you've ever used a phone or a tablet, you've probably used a touchscreen. And even some select laptops, such as this Chromebook here, has a built-in touchscreen where I could, tap on it where I want, or I can drag around, or I can even zoom in if I use my fingers the right way. And even this has a touchscreen. And as you can see, there's a lot of different, uses to it, right? If I was to go on some sort of website like YouTube, I mean, laptop touchscreens, am I right? I can scroll around and I can really choose some random video to look at, and I mean, you can use it. You don't need to use your touchpad, or you don't need to have a mouse plugged in at all time. You can just use it whenever. And this is some weird ads, but yeah, you can just do that if you really wanted to. But it also begs the question: what mechanism from my computer allows me to use my finger as something I can use, like even like a device to scroll around to color or whatever? What mechanism allows me to do this? To start, let's talk about how a touchscreen works. And to do that, we need to know that there are multiple types of touchscreens. The two types of touchscreens I'll go over today are resistive touchscreens and capacitive touchscreens. So first, let's go over resistive touchscreens. So resistive touchscreens use a sort of film or a very thin piece of material like this to sort of simulate these presses. So what they'll do is they have this little film at here, at the top, and then they'll have two more films, this little red one here, and another one here. And as you probably know, computers need electricity. You need to plug them into a wall, or a laptop might need a battery. They need electricity, and that's really what powers these little machines here. And for a touchscreen, it's not really different. You need electricity for them to work. And how it works is that there is a little bit of electricity going through one of these sort of films. They're called like transparent electrode film. And by the way, I got these pictures, these little images. I didn't draw these from some websites, and I'll leave them a link down below. You can go read some articles. They're pretty interesting. But there's a little bit of electricity kind of going through one of these films. And so what happens is that when you press on these films, like this one, it pushes this one down, and so these two touch. And so when they touch, the electricity might decide to travel up here, the low voltage electricity, and it might travel over here, and it'll get sent to basically the computer or a little sensor, and the sensor will say, "Oh, I was pressed right here," and it detects it as a press. If it's being held for maybe a long time and there's maybe a lot in here, perhaps it might say, "Oh, they're holding," or if it's you're moving your finger around, it notices taps here, and then a tap here, and a tap here. It's going to know you're pressing a different place. But a couple more things about this sort of touchscreen in particular, and I'm going to explain them a bit more as I go. So of course we know the films and they connect with the electricity. Of course, behind it is this sort of glass. This is basically the screen, um, LED, whatever you want to call it. So this is basically the screen. What all the little colors and everything. That's there are also these little spacer dots here. I should probably use a color. These spacer dots. Color. Spacer dots. And these basically they're called spacer because they basically space out the film in a certain way. Because imagine imagine that you didn't have these dots, and gravity would actually sort of pull this down, right? And then the whole screen in the middle might just be tapping constantly, right? are holding something down, and obviously it wouldn't be very nice. So they use these spacer dots to kind of prop up this film so that it could do this. And when you press it down, it might do this. And there's also this film up top. And this basically keeps electricity from, going into your hand. You don't want that exactly happening, although the amount of electricity actually in these little electrode films really aren't that much. Like if you were to touch them, you wouldn't get shocked or you wouldn't shock anyone else. And really, because of this design, you could get really anything and press on it as a touchscreen. So, for example, if you had a pencil and, back of it as a eraser, you could pretty much use the pencil eraser as like a stylus or like a sort of a pin for a touchscreen, at least a resistive touchscreen. And I don't know, in some ways that's cool. You can use just about anything as long as it can be pushed down and connect these two little films here. However, resistive touchscreens aren't very common. The places you'll most likely find resistive touchscreens is in older phones, from the early 2000s, probably maybe late 1990s. You'll find them in a lot of ATMs nowadays, and maybe most notably to the youngsters out there in the audience, the Nintendo DS, the original Nintendo DS and Nintendo DS Lite actually had a resistive film, sort of resistive touchscreen built into it. So it's kind of interesting, but what about the phones of today, right? What about my phone if you have a newer phone? Well, they have the other type of touchscreen. They have what's called a capacitive. And they work a little bit differently. So, I have some notes here I was using. This here is an image from the Institute of Physics. And you can go check out again in the description. You can see this picture and a whole article that goes much more detail. And you probably explain a little better than me, the Institute of Physics. But this is kind of how it works. So it's very similar to how the resistive touchscreen works. So again, small voltage is applied to the screen, so the computer sends out some electricity to the screen, and in a lot of circuits, the idea is that the electricity wants to flow from point A to point B, right? So without touching it, the electricity will just flow. It'll reach the other side, and sensors on here will pretty much say, "Oh, well, there is nothing in the way, so everything works well." But as you can see, there's red arrows pointing to this guy touching the screen, and well, instead of using sorry about that, instead of using force like this person here, which is connecting these two films, instead, what's gonna happen is that the electricity will flow. Okay, it will flow this way, but a little bit of it's gonna flow here and into his hand, and probably into the ground, somewhere. A little bit of it, not this much, probably. I don't know. Not very much. Again, it won't be enough to shock you. Again, it's a very small voltage. But if you want to think of it in this sense, it's kind of like a river. And these are the electrons flowing in the river, electrons, the electricity. And they're flowing in the river, and there's a little person sort of watching right here, and they're kind of looking at it and like, okay, well, we have whatever voltage is going across. But whenever a little bit of this goes to this guy, you might have less going here. And so the person looking at the electricity flowing here might say, oh, well, there's actually a little bit less electricity coming through here. And then they're going to say, well, that can only mean one thing, that it was pressed somewhere. And where was it pressed? Well, that depends on where they pressed it, of course. But there are usually sensors at the corners, and these sensors sometimes, of course, can detect where you pressed it, how long you pressed it, and whatnot. And of course, these are the capacitive touchscreens that are found in modern phones and tablets. But it kind of begs the question in many ways, why do we use capacitive touchscreens instead of resistive touchscreens in a lot of our phones? And the reason that a lot of the the modern phones and tablets don't use resistive touchscreens anymore is because resistive touchscreens aren't as responsive. So you might tap it and there might be a little bit of a delay until you get it. The computer can register and detect that you tapped the screen. So there's a little bit of a delay and probably not very noticeable, but resistive touchscreens tend to be, they tend to have a little bit of a longer delay between pressing and computer realizing that you pressed something. Another thing is that resistive touchscreens tend to be a little less durable, and again, these spacer dots maybe they wear out over time, something, and they might not work for as long, not as reliable. While capacitive touchscreens, they don't actually use any of these spacer dots, as far as I know, at least. So it doesn't really need these to kind of hold it up all the time. And thirdly, the capacitive touchscreens are a lot more accurate. Press here, you might press here, here. And in a resistive touchscreen, it's still very accurate, so it's not as accurate. Although something interesting about capacitive touchscreens is that I was talking about the eraser and how you can use the butt of an eraser basically to tap a resistive touchscreen, but on a capacitive touchscreen, you actually you of course my finger would work, and it's kind of interesting. You don't really think about it, but your finger works, but something you're touching it with eraser, it doesn't work, and that's because the eraser is an insulator, so the electricity and the voltage here can't really travel through it very well. So it basically is very negligible from this whole system. A person looking at this won't even notice really a change. So they're going to there's no one touch anything right now. So it's kind of interesting. And for me at least, this is something just about everyone uses, right? Everyone has a phone. Most people have a phone. Most people have a tablet. And some people might have a laptop that has a touchscreen. And you use it all the time. A lot of phones, you basically can't use a mouse or a keyboard, right? You could probably, but who does that? So you can use your finger to scroll around and really think about it. You just kind of do it. And it's something you really can't even see without something like a microscope. So it's something interesting, some small mechanism that does a lot actually. Realize it. You don't ever think about how these pieces work. Um, so yeah, that's about it for now about how touchscreens work. A little bit of the insight. So as always, if you enjoyed the video and found it somewhat educational, consider sharing it with others. And if you have anything else to add or you found something inaccurate in my video, please leave a comment. Let me know, and try to do something else. Maybe fix the video. Anyways, as always, take care.